Nikki Sixx, we're a best-selling author now, songwriter, musician, movie producer, husband, dad, dog dad,
Yeah,
photographer. Can we add like rancher to the resume now as well at your
I'm,
new
I'm
place
not.
out there in Wyoming?
I'm not an official rancher, but I will say I am a local. Even though supposedly you need to be in Jackson, Wyoming, for a certain amount of time to claim that title. I just claimed it. I got a shirt that says local on it. My cowboy hat says local. My horse branded says local. More clickbait and hate mail we'll get from our first 3 minutes on our interview.
That's great. That's great. Well, congratulations, man. I wonder if was it a product of the pandemic, or is this something you had been planning for a while? Like, I just got to get out of LA, man.
It was a few things. Los Angeles was not the place I went to in the '70s. A lot of people gone there with the dream, and there's so much opportunity there. And I'd outgrown that time because it was the '70s and very early '80s for me, and what I did, and the bands that I was in, including Motley Crue. And just, as the years went, I moved further and further and further from, Hollywood, so to speak, and then getting sober, moving further and further. So it's like my life really didn't evolve around Los Angeles, other than that my band lived there and we would rehearse demos, and our offices were there and stuff like that. And it's just like, Vince had moved out years ago, and he'd moved in different places, lived in Las Vegas for a long time. Then Mick moved out, and they live in Nashville. And it was less about like getting together for band rehearsal than it was about just like our family and where we lived, and the congestion, and then the crime rates, and the pandemic hitting. And we've been talking about getting another house, like a second house, a getaway house, maybe a mountain home, whatever, for years. And a couple years before our daughter Ruby was born, I was talking to some other parents. I have older kids too, and they're in college and doing their own life now. And I heard some of the friends of the older parent talking about their kids going into high school, and they were buying them bulletproof backpacks.
Brutal.
And there have been all these shootings. They've been right down the street from us, and all these like overdoses, and some of these like really you would not picture in certain neighborhoods with the opiate epidemic. And we just made the decision for our daughter and for the next stage of my life and my wife's life to go back to like a small town and kind of raise her in a place where what she learns is, riding horses and not like jumping over syringes at the park. And it led to, I had an original idea for a book, and then being here, finding a home and moving here and having property, and where we live, you can't see any other houses. We're on top of a butte, and it's beautiful. Awesome. And as the crow flies, I'm 2 hours from where I grew up in Idaho. And all these feelings start bubbling up. And I was sitting like on this back part of our property. And I just thought to myself, like, where did everybody go? And so I went inside, and something I do is I document a lot. I've done this since a kid. So I just wrote a couplet, and it said, once I started flying, I forgot how to stop. It wasn't just me. It was also you that lost. And what I meant by that was like, I needed to reconnect. And then I had this idea of like, why don't I do a book and change it, like literally end it, excuse me, not change it, on the day that I changed my name to Nikki Sixx, before Motley Crue. Like, what were those 21 years? The discovery of music, the coming of age, growing up in the country, realizing that the small town was way too small and you had to get out and get to LA. Ironically, the big town got too big and I had to go back to the small town. So it's like an interesting circle of life type concept. Yeah.
I was going to ask if it sort of felt like it came full circle at that point, because, I don't get the impression from what I've read from you and heard over the years that you particularly liked living in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, but then you find yourself, finding a home not far from that original place.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I do the things I did when I was a kid. I fish, we hike, we spend a lot of time out on the river, we go up to the lakes. My wife and daughter are jumping off the boat into the water. And I said, do you realize it's like 50 degrees because like we live like by a glacier.
Right. Right. And
So
your blood's
the one
thin from
thing,
living in Southern California for all these
the
years,
one
right?
thing that comes with age is wisdom.
Right. Right. The dogs are getting
That,
into skunks. I saw them.
yeah.
So the first 21, How I Became Nikki Sixx is the book. It comes out on October 19th, 6 a.m. Hits is out on the 22nd. I hate to use the phrase upside of the pandemic because I don't know that there's been a lot of good news over the course of the last year and a half, but has this been sort of an upside having this extra time? I mean, are these projects a product of, just having the time to work on them? Because I imagine if you were out doing stadium tour and all that business, maybe you wouldn't have been able to get all of this done.
Well, I mean, I'm directly influenced by my surroundings, people, touring. Like when I did a whole series for Leica Camera, and I documented homelessness across Canada, and it was in this dead of winter tour thing. So I was like out and documenting what addiction was like on the street, and wrote this over two different blogs, wrote like kind of the experience and what I think we could do. So that was me being directly influenced by my environment. First, I had the idea, well, what can I do besides travel across the country? Maybe I could document that. I grew up with like writers like Bukowski and Kerouac, and when you think about things like On the Road and the innocence and coming of age and just like how they did it, Footloose and Fancy Free, hitchhiking, a lot of this stuff that was around that I read about or experienced as a kid, it got me to like document my life. I'm glad I did, because of the Heroin Diaries. I was writing down what I was going through. So this book was a little different when I realized that I needed to go back and tell the story. I couldn't tell it just from my perspective. I needed to also get other people's perspective. So when I talk about my mom and my dad and the fact that I had a sister who was born with Down syndrome, and my dad left, and my mom downloaded into my head that my dad was a horrible guy. So I carried that anger through, and I changed my name to Nikki Sixx, because God knows I don't want to be Frank Ferrana and carry on your legacy, because you're a fucking asshole. So said my mom. Now I go back, I talk to my aunt and uncle, and I talk to people who were there and extended family people, and they're like, we never even saw your dad take a drink. I'm like, wow, like head spinning. So I wanted to tell these stories because, families are complicated. Bands that are families are complicated and sometimes difficult. So I'm able to kind of bridge the two and tell the story. And how do I interweave between being a family man and recovery, and go back and tell the story and have to face some demons, and take the reader along in something that might have happened in their own way. It's not a dark book. I mean, honestly, it's quite light. Somebody wrote recently a review and they said, surprisingly innocent. Well, I mean, your first 21 years, you're going to get into some stuff in the teenage years.
Sure.
Sure. Because I know you did. Trying to keep that one quiet, but it's all over the internet. But,
right.
There's the discovery of self and discovery of music that I find is consistent throughout human beings. Whether you're different cultures, whatever, there is that thing. And I was always fascinated by the idea, like, what was LeBron James's like tipping point? I bet it was before he was 21.
Right.
What
like
was
that day he
Gates? What was it he knew? When did Bill Gates know? When did Keith Richards know? When did Bukowski know?
Mm-hmm.
I had those moments, and it was in Idaho. And it showed me that if I want that, I can't stay here. So it's the journey of going into the 70s in Los Angeles and learning my craft, learning how to be a songwriter, learning how to put bands together, learning what worked and didn't work, and sticking to my guns, so to speak.
Is what you talk about self-discovery? What did you learn about yourself writing this book?
What I learned about this is kind of a weird thing to say, but I feel that I was always a pretty nice kid. And I'm extremely, like, I care about people and I care about the planet in different ways than other people. Like, I obviously care about addiction. I speak out a lot about, opiate addiction and what we might be able to do differently. So what I've noticed from the beginning that I can remember and documented through even today is there's a consistency of just being a good person, I think. And I think that during my years of addiction, I lost track of that. And I think that when I found recovery, I refound that part of myself. And that's why it was so comforting to be sober for me. Like it's uncomfortable for me to be loaded. I don't feel like I'm actually myself.
Or out of control, right?
Yeah.
All of the events and experiences in the book made you who you are today, obviously, hence the name in the book. Would you do it all again?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. What I like about this kid, Frank, is first of all, I think that Frank, there's a version of a Frank in everybody. Those youthful years of riding bicycles. Like in my case, I don't know about in your case, but the rule was you come home when the sun goes down.
Right.
We love summer. You have to come home at 8:00.
Right.
Winter sucks. You got to come home at 4:00. But that's when dinner was on the table, or as my grandfather would say, supper. Uh-huh. Supper's on the table. And you want to get in trouble? Don't show. My grandmother or whoever's parents would slave away and cook and make dinner, and I would show up an hour late. I'm in a world of right. trouble. The innocence of that and the lesson in that of respect and being aware of other people going out of their way for you and participating in relationships. These are things that we can use in bands, we can use in business. So I found through the discovery and reimagining some of this stuff through other people's memories, I'm not necessarily reimagining, just like hearing it from the horse's mouth. Like, yeah, this is what it was like back then. This is how simple it was. To me, is inspiring, and a lot of people have read the book are like, yeah, I remember those times. And those are the foundations for the day that you turned on the radio and you heard something, you were like, yeah, what is that? Who is that? And you find a picture and you're like, where do these people come from? I grew up in the 70s, man. My mind is still blown. I mean, you got Donna Summer on one shoulder and you got the Rolling Stones on another one, and coming straight down the center of your eyes, you got the Sex Pistols, and you're like loving Cheap Trick, but you love the Ramones. You're like, how can I mix all this together? Well, not Donna Summer, but let's mix it all together.
Get Donna Summer in there, sure.
Got a little backbeat in there, a little Donna Summer backbeat in there.
Sure. If I ran into young Frank here in Seattle, and told him he was going to be a New York Times best-selling author, what do you think he'd say to me? That's what he would say, right? He'd just laugh at me.
Just laugh and walk away. He would laugh. He might flip you off and then walk away.
A nice kid. We'd get along great.
I think that was too far in the future for me. But what wasn't too far was learning how to play Highway Star or Bang a Gong, or reading those Lou Reed lyrics, and then like cross-referencing that with like William Burroughs. I was the weird kid. I carried it's like this. I had a notepad and I had my pen or pencil in there, and something would happen and I'd be like,
not exactly a lady killer at that age, huh?
Oh man, I had no game, dude. I mean, there's no game. Have you seen the scrapbooks inside the book yet? There's
No, I
two.
haven't. No.
Okay, well, you're gonna say
All right.
he's got no game back then. I was trying to grow my hair out. My grandfather would have none of that, so we finally agreed on some version of a long bangs that went over one side. But then I had to wear glasses, and you're in Jerome, Idaho. You're not getting any Tom Fords or Alexander McQueens. You're getting like the bottom of the barrel lens crafters.
Right. Whatever they have at the grocery
The
store.
ones I got were as close to Elvis Presley as I could get, which made me look more like a serial killer. You'll see, when you see the photos, you'll go, Nikki Sixx could have been a serial killer.
Tell me some about the Starwood. I know a lot of us are familiar with the Starwood. I know you talk about it quite a bit in the book. Explain the Starwood to folks who maybe aren't familiar.
Starwood was a very cool club on down in Hollywood. One side of it at the time in the 70s was kind of like the dance side. They'd be playing, all the dance music, and that's where the girls were. And then there was like a bar in between there, and for that side of the club. And then there was a middle section that had some video games. I used to hang out in there and video games with Randy Rhoads and all these different musicians. And we were just all kids. Randy was already a superstar in Los Angeles, but they didn't have a major recording contract. And then there was the club side, and there was a VIP section, and every band in the world that played live music could play there. And the thing start, rarely did you have top 40 bands that were playing there. In the 70s, that was a real thing. Top 40 bands, 4 sets a night. The musicians that grew up in the top 40 circuit, like really learned to play everything from Average White Band to Kashmir to the Ramones, had to. And I didn't fit into that circle because I wrote my own music, because I was documenting all the time. Cheap Trick did this, and how did Aerosmith do this on Last Child? And I would go to these auditions, and they'd say, okay, well, let's run Cold as Ice by Foreigner. And I'd be like playing along, and I'd be bored. I mean, I love the song, but I'm like, this is really what I do, is play other people's music. And then they would stop. They go, dude, what are you doing? And I go, what are you talking about? He goes, you're not playing it just like the record. Did you not study the record? I go, not really. I mean, it's an A and then it drops over to a D. And that's kind of the chorus, goes to a G. And they're like, yeah, but you have to play just like the record or we can't get the gig. And I say, okay, I understand. But, I have 15 original songs. And I remember hearing so many times, look, I mean, you look badass and you got equipment, you got a good attitude, but like, there's no money, Frank, in original music. And there's no money in original music. And I was like, but don't you want to be in a band? Like I couldn't, it made no sense to me.
You were aspiring for more than playing covers, right? And probably not the only piece of bad advice you got over the years.
Well, I wasn't thinking about buying a Ferrari and a mansion in Beverly Hills. I was thinking about band rehearsal and that cold piece of pizza. And hey, you want to sit here and learn that song one more time. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, let's go to the Rainbow and hang out. And we're so poor, maybe some girl will take pity on us and buy us another piece of pizza. And we can live one more day.
That's living large, right?
One more day in heaven, though.
Yeah.
Right? That's all we cared about. And I got to document that in the book and talk about that, and went back to original band members and went back to the fact that I believed what I believed. And when I believe in something, I will not deviate. And I'm very strategic. I'm the kind of person that goes, okay, we're going to win the Super Bowl. And it was like, we haven't even drafted yet. Who's this guy? Who's this guy over here? I go, Drafts start first, practices, we got to weed out the week, encourage this, we got to do this. Halfway through the season, we got to make an adjustment. We're in the playoffs. That's not good enough. We're in the Super Bowl. That's not good enough. Nobody wants to go to the Super Bowl and lose. Like, I'd just rather not do it. So I only want to go to the Super Bowl win. That's how my brain works. So because of that kind of brain, it was like, that guy's not going to be the next Jimmy Page. I got to get a new guitar. That guy's not a blank. And that led me to forming these bands that just weren't quite right. And then Blackie Lawless was my friend, and Blackie was putting a band together called Sister. So he took me and Lizzie Gray and Dane Rage, who were all together as our little group. We were going to start our own band, and we became Sister. And that was, I remember being in the studio with Blackie, and Blackie's a great songwriter. He's a very talented guy, and obviously went on to have a huge career in Wasp. I called my grandparents and I said, I think I got one. They said, what do you mean? I said, everybody in the band's a star. Everybody in the band can play. This guy Blackie, this guy can write songs. I got a bunch of songs. Lizzie has a bunch of songs. This is it. Grandparents are so happy. I called him back the next day and I said, Blackie fired us because we were green and it was his band and it was his vision, and rightfully so. We joined his gang and we weren't good enough yet. We were green. So we formed our own band, London. And then ended up being one of the biggest bands in Los Angeles, but all like learning to write music, learning to design. In clubs, we were doing shows that looked way bigger than a club. And that's all we lived for. I remember like one day, like me and Lizzie were like we don't have enough gas to get to rehearsal for all three of us. And we had to take a bus to rehearsal.
City bus.
Because that's how important. That's a city bus, because that's how important rehearsal was to us. And then afterwards, we're like, well, how are we going to get home? It was always an adventure. That coming of that learning your craft, learning that you have a place on this planet, but you're not following what everybody else is doing.
The first 21, how I became Nikki Sixx on the 19th, 6 a.m. hits on the 22nd. Nikki, always a pleasure, dude. Great to see you. Hopefully next time we can do it in person, right?
We can do a big hug.
Right. It's been a minute. All right, brother. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Take care.